Stanford's most successful remote viewer reveals the location of 4 alien bases on Earth. Alexander Light on Humans Are Free reports. What is remote viewing? Well, please see the 2 videos before this one. It's an ability that allows the viewer to be able to describe a remote geographic location up to several hundred kilometers away, even more, from their physical location, one that they have never been to. This skill was taught to soldiers in multiple countries around the world, and from what we understand, still is being taught. In the United States, the remote viewing program ran for 25 years at Stanford Research Institute, SRI. Before 70% of it was declassified, it was run in conjunction with the CIA and other intelligence agencies. In 1976, a presentation was given at the Institute of Electric and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, on a paper published by the Institute on behalf of Hal Puford and Russell Targ, key players in what became known as the Stargate Project. The paper was titled A Perceptual Channel for Information Transfer Over Kilometer Distances, Historical Perspectives and Recent Research. And after its publication, that's when everything went dark into the world of Special Access Programs, SAPs, so sensitive that they are exempt from reporting to the U.S. Congress. And not even the Commander-in-Chief knows about most of these. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. As the map here shows, it's in Zimbabwe, one of these 5 bases, and they're usually, of course, as we were told, in mountains, hidden deep in the mountains. Now, to summarize, over the years, the back and forth criticism of protocols, refined methods, and successful replication of this type of remote viewing in independent labs has yielded considerable scientific evidence for the reality of the remote viewing phenomenon. After its declassification in 1995, or at least partial declassification, the Department of Defense and those involved revealed an exceptionally high success rate. Adding to the strength of these results was a discovery that a growing number of individuals could be found to demonstrate high-quality remote viewing, often to their own surprise. The development of this capability at SRI has evolved to the point where visiting CIA personnel with no previous exposure to such concepts have performed well under controlled laboratory conditions. Multiple examples were used, from locating a lost spy plane in Africa, please see the video before this one, where a U.S. government uses remote viewing to locate such a spy plane. The spy plane was a Russian spy plane. Now, viewing future events as well as past events. Remote viewing is not limited to time. It's a quantum phenomenon, like most parapsychological phenomenon, they say. In the declassified literature, there are many shocking examples where remote viewing was successfully used for intelligence purposes, which makes sense given the fact the government decided to fund it for 25 years. It was also used to discover the rings around Jupiter. A man by the name of Ingo Swann, one of the program's best remote viewers, was able to describe and view a ring around Jupiter, which at the time scientists had no idea even existed. This happened before NASA's Pioneer 10 spacecraft flew by Jupiter, confirming that the ring did in fact exist. This is amazing because at the time there was no way to even perceive rings existed around planets. Now, to determine whether it was necessary to have a beacon individual at the target site, Swann suggested carrying out an experiment to remote view the planet Jupiter before the upcoming NASA Pioneer 10 flyby. Quote, in that case, much to his chagrin and ours, he found a ring around Jupiter and wondered if perhaps he had remote viewed Saturn by mistake. Our colleagues in astronomy were quite unimpressed as well, until the flyby revealed that an unanticipated ring did in fact exist around Jupiter. End quote. And here's a great brief timeline of government remote viewing. The common theme around remote viewing is extraterrestrial. Since the declassification of the program, many people from within it remote viewers as well as Army personnel and academics have come out and spoken about the program. The most popular viewer in the program, Ingo Swann, as mentioned above, wrote a book called Penetration, where he provides more details about the program that we did not get from the government files. He described viewing humanoid bodies on the moon, working on something backside of the moon, as well as tall structures, buildings, and more. He was very outspoken about the extraterrestrial presence, and that was apparently known about within these programs. Then we have Joseph McMoneagle. He was another remote viewer who had experiences remote viewing an extraterrestrial presence. This time it came from Mars. Many of them have been outspoken about the extraterrestrial presence. On a side note, while mentioning Mars and remote viewing, it's noteworthy to bring awareness to the fact that 6 former U.S. Army remote viewers were commissioned by officials within the Russian space program to study the cause of Phobos's disappearance. The viewers issued a final report titled Enigma Penetration, Soviet Phobos 2 Spacecraft Images Anomaly. And as Jim Marrs points out in his novel Our Occulted History, quote, the report stated that a disc-shaped object rose from the Martian surface towards Phobos 2, while a second object moved into an even closer proximity and scanned the probe with a penetrating particle beam device, which disrupted the communication and guidance equipment. The out-of-control Soviet craft was then struck by a micrometeorite that delivered the coup de grace. The remote viewer said this may have been no accident, as it seems that all of the technology put into space from Earth is scrutinized closely by non-humans. After being struck, Phobos 2 spiraled down, crashing onto the Martian surface, end quote. Now, what about these 4 alien bases that the remote viewers saw? Then there's Pat Price, who along with Ingo Swann is described as one of SRI's most successful viewers. His sessions were extremely accurate within the remote viewing community. Among the declassified literature, he's best known for his sketches of gantries and cranes which matched CIA intelligence photographs he had never seen. This was during the Cold War. Russell Targ, the co-founder of the program at RSI, also recently given lectures on everything he knows about ESP. In fact, his TED Talk about it was canceled. Now, according to Atwater, Pricer has successfully remote viewed 4 extraterrestrial bases stationed on Earth. One was located under Mount Ziel and under Mount Perdido in Spain, as well as Mount Inyangani in Zimbabwe, and also in Alaska under Mount Hayes. This comes from a plethora of sources, including one of the leading researchers in the field, Timothy Good, from his book Unearthly Disclosure. What also is interesting to note is the lore associated with these mountains. Like in Yangani Nagi, for example, there are no shortages of strange disappearances of those who go wandering in the region. It's well known in the region, and the mountain has been surrounded by mysterious lore for a long time. Then Credo Mutwa. One interesting story comes from Credo Mutwa, born in 1921. He's a Zulu Sangoma, a traditional healer from southern Africa. He has done tremendous humanitarian work in Africa and is extremely knowledgeable in Zulu tradition and lore. Now, there are uncountable amounts of stories pertaining to extraterrestrial contact. If even one of them is true, it's fascinating. Many of these stories corroborate with each other and couple with proof for the extraterrestrial hypothesis regarding UFOs. And all of the testimony from people with credibility, it's not ridiculous at all to contemplate. In the bushes of the mountain, while Mutwa was a Sangoma apprentice, he was searching for a herb which he planned to use as medicine, something he did quite often to bring health back to his people, specifically with regards to HIV pandemic in Africa, a disease he says was created to destroy the African population. While he was doing so, he was covered by a bright blue mist, which he said, quote, was swirling all around me, getting between me and the eastern landscape, end quote. Later, he found himself in what he described as underground, underneath the mountain. This is interesting because it's exactly what the remote viewer Pat Price describes. Quote, the next thing he knew, he was lying on a table of some sort. His boots and trousers were missing. He was approached by a group of gray-skinned humanoid creatures with very large heads, with very thin arms and very thin legs, end quote. A lot of this information also comes from several interviews Mutwa did with David Icke. Price describes the occupants of these bases as looking like Homo sapiens, except for their lungs, heart, blood, and eyes. Mutawa wanted to flee but could not move and was paralyzed. He said, I just lay there like a goat on a sacrificial altar. Mutawa was then subjected to some kind of operation on his left thigh, which caused him to scream out in agony. An abundance of blood flowed from the wound. Next, one of the creatures stuck a silver pen-like object up his right nasal passage, then yanked it out. The pain, he said, was out of this world, end quote. Quote, the pain subsided, however, when one of the creatures, who was bigger and taller than the others and who possessed an air of authority, placed its hand on Mutwa's forehead. Mutwa could sense that the creature was female, despite the fact that she lacked breasts and other feminine characteristics. Staring at Mutwa intently, it projected visions of destruction into his mind. He saw cities being destroyed by floods, fires, and other natural disasters, end quote. And he speaks at length of these experiences in his interview with David Icke. Now, he goes on to describe an instrument being inserted into his genitals. As soon as it was taken out, his bladder opened and he urinated hard. Another creature came in and had pink skin, blue eyes, his cheekbones, and looked almost human. The creature then mounted Mutwa like a crazy Zulu girl, he said. All right, I'm not going to go into that. Now, in another comment, and among them many supposed extraterrestrial contactees, he said during this encounter, a device was used to make, okay, I'm not going to go into this. It has to do with, his intimate contact. Now, it's important to mention that numerous extraterrestrial encounters have been described what we perceive as friendly and unfriendly contact. This was an invasion. It was an RAPE of him, the poor guy. Now, as well as unfriendly procedures being performed. I shouldn't laugh. With this, I shouldn't laugh. Maybe one of the herbs he was picking could have been psychedelic. I don't know. Anyway, it's strange to say the least, but as far as underground alien bases, it's a possibility. An interesting encounter of mine, I used to teach the First Nations Reserve in a place called North Spirit Lake. I came home for the holidays, and when I arrived in Toronto, Canada, I was waiting for the train. The next to me was a gentleman in uniform. Anytime I see what appears to be a senior officer in uniform, I always ask questions. This one was a veteran, having served overseas in the Middle East for 5 years, and was now with the Coast Guard. Instantaneously, I thought of the ocean and underwater military bases. Having studied them in depth, I knew he would most likely be aware of their existence being of the Coast Guard. This was about 10 years ago, when it was taboo to talk about strange things that no longer seemed so taboo anymore. I asked him about HARP. His eyes lit up wide. He was shocked and surprised and told me he couldn't talk about it. I asked him about in-bottom and under-ocean military bases. The same thing happened. I asked him about extraterrestrials and what was going on with that. He told me, come work for us and ask them yourself, quote unquote. Okay, this is taken from the book by Jim Marrs, Our Occulted History, and it's on Humans Are Free by Arjun Walia from Collective Evolution. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.